Artfight's score categorization system is extremely convoluted, yet not specific enough. It's a dense wall, especially if you partake in more than one art form besides painting and illustrating stills, but there are many instances of visibly intensive work being rewarded very little. I think the Artfight staff already knows this, though. So, I could have sworn they said somewhere they intended on reworking the attack ratings, but I can't find the news post if they did, so maybe I made that up through the sheer power of wishful thinking. Either way, I'm not here to kick dirt on them. I just want to discuss ways to more accurately reward effort without overcomplicating things even further. I have a good starting point, but I really want to hear the thoughts of people who do other art forms that I don't. First, I want to weigh the importance of Artfight rewarding points at all, and how different people might respond to it. Even if scoring artwork will forever be subjective and nebulous, it is not completely meaningless or cynical. Sure, there are some people motivated by score first and foremost, just trying to generate the biggest number. This will happen in any system or game where big number is involved. I'd like to believe most people see points as a supplementary motivator to put in genuine effort, rather than the end goal. I am already happy to create art for other people for its own sake, but seeing a big number after working hard on something for a while still feels nice, you know? Putting in a lot of effort and time into something that results in a smaller number for arbitrary reasons can be deflating, too. Gamifying and scoring art doesn't need to be cold and cynical. It can motivate you to experiment and challenge yourself. I do create more complete and high-effort artwork during Artfight, and I can't deny that scoring big motivates me to do that. But the fact that I'm making art for other people motivates me more. I'm not crapping out random extra details and backgrounds just for the points. I use the desire for big number to push myself to create things that I find challenging and interesting but struggle to commit to without external motivators. I'm not gonna avoid making something just because it won't result in maximum pointage. I'm having fun first and foremost, and I believe most people feel the same way to varying degrees. Some people aren't motivated by the score even a little bit, and that's great. I'm happy for those people. But clearly the points matter to the event as a whole. While acknowledging that score influences a large amount of participants, at least a little bit, it'd be great to motivate creativity, intentionality, and the spirit of the game directly with the scoring system. Let's start from scratch on most of the attack categorization. The character size can remain more or less the same. I can't think of anything better than what they already have for it. Maybe they could add complication or intricacy settings to the characters. Like, a full body of a mech is definitely more difficult to draw than the full body of a guy wearing a t-shirt. But this could also just be incorporated into the completion levels and dynamic levels that I will talk about. To streamline categorization, most, if not all, art forms should be given the same general completion and composition ratings, with visual and text examples of what falls into each stage within different art forms. The most specific and granular part of categorization should be medium and technique, including things like illustration, painting, clay, crochet, sewing, fursuit making, 3D modeling, paper crafts, and so on. This would be the most prominent part of point calculation, ideally decided by surveying artists of all sorts about how much effort and time it takes to do any given part of their chosen art form. Completion ratings should include multiple options falling between draft and intricate. Draft, including rough work such as preliminary sketches, rough blots of coloring and rendering, untextured and uncolored rough sculpts, and low poly models. Touched up would include sketches without construction lines, rough line work and lineless color, minimal and basic texturing and coloring on rough sculpts and low poly models. Clean or intentional, including visually clear lines, lineless color, cleaned up sketches, and aspects of intended roughness and messiness. clean sculpts and manually created textures and shaders on models of any poly count. Intricate, including detailed line work and rendering, time-consuming photorealistic styles, high poly models and retopologized sculpts, complicated procedurally generated textures or layered texture work involving stuff like normal maps and handmade textures. More examples to be given for other art forms. I'm just most familiar with the process of illustration and digital 3D modeling. If the Artfight staff consider a scoring system like this, consulting artists who practice less statistically represented mediums in some sort of site-wide feedback form would be great. I think having these more general categories while making the art medium and technique more specific would make it easier to rate your own attacks and give more appropriate scores to time-consuming, complicated artwork that frequently gets underrated in the current system. I have seen very detailed grayscale ink or pencil that winds up getting like 10 to 20 points because by the names of the current categories, it's not immediately obvious that hatching and toning counts as color. I think most people think of color as color, and if they're working in black and white, then it's just uncolored. Sure, they could read the category options more thoroughly, but the categories being so convoluted and granular makes information difficult to parse and recall. I have many friends who mostly work in black and white because they prefer mediums like ink, pencil, lino printing, or charcoal. I think it's a little bit sad that the current categories, at least in the way they're named, somewhat discourage these techniques by considering them less complete. A quick fix would be renaming the color categories to toned, but it should go further. A revamped rating system should not accidentally imply specific mediums and tools are less finished or of less effort. The current ratings for illustration and painting feel as though they were initially conceived by centering the workflow of sketch, line work, color, and shading. Any other technique or step of the process was just shoved into the closest approximation within that set of steps, making the categories bloated and less comprehensive. Composition ratings should be derived from the thought and intentionality that went into construction of the art, based on things that are visibly apparent and not necessarily related to the artist's skill level. The spectrum would exist between simple and dynamic. I don't have as many ideas on what to name all of these because it'd be best if each category has a value-neutral or positive name to encourage artists and not shame usage of categories that reward less points. Simple, including characters viewed from straightforward perspectives with basic posing and minimal character interaction, with no self-made background elements. Intermediate options, including pieces with involved character interaction, props, incomplete or sparse environmental elements, self-made abstract backgrounds, variation of posing and visual perspective. Dynamic options including complicated posing and perspectives, character interaction such as characters intertwined and overlapping with each other, characters strongly integrated into environments, and complex abstract backgrounds with strong direction. This system will be very subjective in the same way that the current system's polish option is, and everyone's version of each completion and composition level would look different. Even so, it should be decently possible to discern an individual artist's different ratings. The categories being more widely encompassing and subjective to the individual will be inclusive and rewarding to more art mediums, and weighing visible intent will push more people to think harder about the characters involved and inspire more personalized art. The animation category can stay granular, considering animators are already suckers for tedious technical stuff anyway. It would include method, frame rate, and length. Method would be either frame by frame or tweening. I believe stop motion or manually posing every individual frame in a digital 3D software would fall under frame by frame, but maybe it's worth categorizing separately. My idea for frame rate and amount of movement may be equally or more complicated than the current system, so it may not be an improvement for comprehension or streamlining, but here goes. Partial and minimal animation would include the background or a few parts of the character moving around, such as 3D turntables, small actions like blinking and waving, or animated GIFs that only have a few frames. Animatic or blocking would be made up of keyframes and key poses with little to no in-betweening. full animation, including categories for 1s, 2s, and 3s. They wouldn't be strict, considering sometimes you just hold frames for a set period of time or switch frame rates briefly, but on average, what's the frame rate being used when things are in motion? If you don't already know, 1s is 24 frames per second, 2s is 12, and 3s is 8. There could maybe be a section between animatic and animating on 3s, but if someone chooses to animate at a higher frame rate than 24 frames per second, it's honestly not my problem. When you look at the dictionary definition for diminishing returns, you actually see an image of someone animating frame by frame at more than 24 frames per second. If possible, length could be a numerical value you can input, likely in seconds. Partial and minimal animation probably doesn't need that option at all. Of course, categories being more loose and subjective means they may be more vulnerable to point farming. Oh well. This came up in my previous video about Artfight, and I've seen many point to the concept of point farming as a risk factor when discussing certain rules or categorizations. I think this is an unnecessary and unhelpful thing to worry about. Getting riled up about the possibility of point farming lends to mean-spirited and policing behavior. If you are someone worried about point farmers, sincerely ask yourself, what are the signs of point farming? And what is the worst thing that can happen if someone gets away with it? The most undeniable signs of point farming are not permitted by other rules. It probably didn't. But what you just said did, and I'm leaving it in. Anyway, the most undeniable signs of point farming are not permitted by other rules, such as creating images that are not representative and respectful of the character or recipient's permissions, and reproducing the same base piece of artwork over and over again. Other possible signs of point farming lean into being unfairly suspect and cruel towards learning artists who just have fun making art faster and less typically complete, and artists you just don't like the work of. If you consider someone's art sloppy or unfinished and you believe they're point farming, but there's not more concrete signs, I think it would save everyone's sanity to assume that they are just an eager, hyperactive beginner. In 2018, I put out like 100 headshot pieces in 1 year. Looking back on it, I don't like much of the art that I made, and I did not try that hard on any individual piece. Was that point farming? Kind of, technically. I indeed wanted a big number. But also, I was excited to participate, having fun, and not hurting anybody. Most supposed point farmers are probably new and young, not disingenuous and callous bad actors. I don't want to discourage these people from participating. They'll probably grow out of the score fixation. There are most definitely some cynical people sliding by consequence-free on this line of plausible deniability, but honestly, they're doing themselves a disservice and they're probably having way less fun than you are, so who cares? If people are wasting their precious time on this planet just to see a made-up number go up with absolutely no actual enjoyment or interest in the art that they're making to do it, that sounds way worse for them than it is for me. I can just ignore them or assume in good faith that they really did try their best and move on. It's a self-regulating issue. The high of big number only lasts so long, and if we starve people like this of attention, then they will eventually shrivel away or grow up and start earnestly participating. There are so many more people genuinely participating in Artfight for the right reasons. If anything, there's absolutely an equal, if not larger, amount of people modestly underrating their artwork or blissfully apathetic towards the score. These things kind of just balance themselves out when the user base is so large and full of different temperaments. Anyone overrating their attacks won't tilt the team's score. This year is making it clear that the score is most reliant on the amount of people on the team, to be honest. There may be a solution for that too. If at all possible, it would be fun to add multipliers to attacks that fulfill certain conditions to encourage the spirit of the game. Some examples I have include being the first to attack a specific user that year, being the first to attack a specific character that year, depicting connected characters together, and so on. There could be a multiplier for revenges, but it should diminish after the first revenge so that chains are not too strongly preferred over finding new people who have not been attacked at all yet. If feasible, dynamic scoring based on user battle ratio and score would be really cool. The higher a person's battle ratio and score is, the more you score by attacking them, rewarding active participation. If one of the teams is heavily outweighing the other in member number, there could be fulfillable tasks to boost the smaller team's points. I'm not super into website development and coding, and I'm sure that others could come up with even more fun ideas, but the general idea is encouraging discoverability and involving everyone a little more evenly. No system for this sort of thing could ever be perfect, but the current system certainly has room to better incentivize behavior that Artfight staff and participants definitely want to see more of. If they do rework the scoring, they should focus on encouraging positive behavior more than objectively quantifiable categorization.